Chapter 2 is all about the skin, or more properly, the integumentary system, which is not only our skin, but our hair and our nails. So, all of these are the outside of our body, right? So, they protect us. That's one of the big functions. But there's a lot more, like being our radiator, um, providing us with cushion and insulation, and so forth. The skin has a tough job, and we spend a lot of time, effort, and money on taking care of our skin, hair, and nails. I mean, think about it, from shampoo to face cleanser to makeup to curling irons, body lotion, you name it. Fair bit of time we spend every single day taking care of the integumentary system. Now, all that care actually wears it out to a certain extent. It does take care of it, especially getting rid of those accumulated bacteria and fungi, which is why we spend a lot of time bathing. But it wears it out. Not only that, but the environment, the sunlight, the wind, even our clothes falling down and scraping our knee wears out the skin, so it needs to be replaced. So really, probably the biggest idea that comes out of this chapter is cell division. So specifically, the cell cycle and mitosis, because our skin and the hair is constantly growing to replace itself. Otherwise, it would get worn out and we'd have no protection. So with that, let's dive into the cell cycle, some of the main concepts, and a few others along the way. Let's start on our concept map with chemistry. We're not going to talk a whole lot about chemistry. You should probably know that the body is mostly water. Now, if I move to the bottom of the page, then we see a few other molecules, specifically these biomolecules, and we'll return to these quite a few times. A couple of important ones, the lipids. So these are things like fats and oils that you probably know about. And in the skin, they had a couple of really important functions. One was simply to moisturize the skin, right? They keep it moist and flexible, even though it's not water, right? So they stay completely moist. The other one is insulation. So that fat layer underneath our skin insulates us, but it also does something else, which is to cushion us from little bumps so we don't get bruised. A lot of the rest of the skin, in particular the hair and fingernail, are made out of proteins, which are pretty tough, and that provides kind of a protective shield around us. Well, that's enough of the chemistry. Let's move on to the cell. So here we see up here an example of something that we talked about in the skin, which is a cell junction. And this one is made of proteins. So here's another roll of proteins. They're holding the cells together. And so the skin is beat up a lot. And if those skins weren't anchored together, and there's not just one of these between cells, there are lots and lots, the skin would just fall apart. And as it ages, it does fall apart. One thing that we can do, an application of this might be if you burn yourself or have a lot of friction, like if you go out and do a bunch of yard work and you haven't in a while, you get blisters. And that's because these cell junctions are getting worn out. So there's one that we could talk about. A lot of other stuff in the skin, but we don't necessarily need to at the moment. That's one that's kind of specific to the skin itself. The other one that I might mention in passing is this blood vessel here. Since our cells are dividing quite a bit, the skin has a pretty robust blood supply. There's a lot of blood vessels right below the surface to support these cells. So the whole job of these blood vessels is to supply that cell with nutrients, and it needs it because it's doing a lot of cell division, which takes energy. Now we can skip forward quite a few pages until we get to growth and reproduction. And so this is where we get into the cell cycle. Okay, so that helps us grow. We don't need to worry about the reproduction part. terms of the skin. It's not going to help us make babies, um, but it does help us grow. And also, I should probably add in here, in this case, it's more for repair. We're repairing skin. We're making new skin to repair the stuff that's worn out. And that comes in right here. So in this example, it's shown as we are one cell. Just got fertilized. This is the first cell that is us. And now we need to turn that into 2 cells. And that's done through the cell cycle. And that's true there. It's true when that cell makes more cells and more cells and more cells. But it's also true in the stem cells of your body, like the ones at the base of your epidermis of the skin. They're constantly making new cells. Now, that's not helping you grow, but it is helping you repair those cells. Now, the cell cycle can be split into a couple of different phases. These first ones are all interphase. That's the longest phase, and that's just the preparation phase, getting you ready for cell division. One of the big things that happens during S phase, if you remember, is that you take this single chromosome and through a process of DNA replication, shown here, that's this part, you make sister chromatids. So that's what's shown here. Now those sister chromatids can be moved around and we see them lined up here in metaphase. Now this M down here actually stands for mitosis, which we know is composed of prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase, along with cytokinesis. In that, these chromosomes are moved around, mostly by microtubules that are attached on either side. This, as I mentioned, it is metaphase, and that's one of those checkpoints along the cell cycle just to make sure everything is going well. Along with this cell cycle, we need to remember that the cell cycle needs to be highly regulated. We can't just have cells dividing and dividing and dividing without control. And that's why skin cancer comes up a lot, because our skin is exposed to the outside environment. And so it's more prone to wear and tear. And some of that is things like ultraviolet light that actually breaks our DNA. I mean, your liver, your brain, the inside of your nose is not exposed to sunlight, so it doesn't have that same exposure. But our skin, that ultraviolet light, gets in and potentially damages the DNA. If it damages those checkpoint genes, well, now our regulatory mechanism to make sure that cell cycle is going just right is broken. And that's where we can potentially get skin cancer. Not a good one. Cell cycle needs to be regulated. There are certain genes that regulate those checkpoints and say, how is everything going? If it's not just perfect, I should stop here and back up, get everything right before I go on, because I don't want to make cells that are bad. And then along the way, this whole chart is kind of different scales in size and scales of time. And so I want to mention this one. When we're looking inside the cell, we're really kind of zooming in to this level, the micrometer scale. A micrometer is 1/1000th of a millimeter. So a millimeter we've worked with. A micrometer is 1/1000th that size. So pretty small. Something we could still see under the microscope, just like we looked at this the other day under the microscope with the onion cells. So that's the size we're talking about. I mention that because when we look up here at the DNA itself, now we're down at the molecular scale, the nanometer, and that is 1/1000th of a micrometer. So now we're at a scale that's too small to even be seen with a microscope. Time scale, this is about 1 day. For us to make a brand new cell to go through all of interphase and mitosis takes about a day. So there we go. Along the way, I might mention here, um, we have lots more mitosis going on, so it comes into play in this growth part. We also have some differentiation, which means those cells are not only dividing and making new, nearly identical cells, but they are differentiating. They're becoming a little bit different, each one, so that they become different body parts. And so here we are as just this cluster of cells. It's more of the same, mitosis and differentiation. And even here, to get from baby to adult is more mitosis plus differentiation. And in this case, I might even add another term in here, development, which gets us back to the adult stage where we can actually reproduce. That was more of a topic from chapter 1. All right, so there we have all of the cell cycle in the context of the life cycle. So these two go together. There's the life cycle and there's the cell cycle. Cell cycle obviously is smaller scale than the life cycle, but it's an important part of it. Let's see what else we have to look at. So physiology. This is the part that I really kind of resonate with because it's a big scale. So this is kind of looking at things at a big picture scale. Remember, a meter is like the length of your leg. So this is looking at big things. You can see here kind of a representation of the whole torso, the lungs and the head, the heart. Now, none of these are really drawn to scale, so don't pay too much attention to that. They're not drawn in the right places. It's just to represent what happens in the body. And I want to focus here on the skin because our skin does quite a few things. One of them right here is lots of mitosis or mitotic cell division right at the base of the skin to make more and more skin cells. So very active. And for that, we need a good blood supply. So our blood flows out of our heart. It's nice and warm, and some of it comes out here and flows right at the base of our skin. And a lot of that's to supply the energy needed for mitosis, but it can be used for a different purpose. Now, there's sensors in the skin that tell the brain, hey, it's hot out here. But the brain also has its own sensors that say, you know, it's hot in here too. And if that's the case, then they're going to send out signals through the nerves, and those are going to hit those blood vessels, and it's going to make those blood vessels dilate or expand. They get bigger, and your face turns red, maybe your skin turns red like when you exercise, and that carries more heat to the surface so that that heat can radiate away from the body. And this is one of those examples of a flow down gradient. We'll come back to this topic quite a few times, but basically the skin is hot, so it has a high amount of heat, and outside is cold, so it has a low amount of heat, and heat wants to spread out. It wants to go from where it's high to low, which means the colder it is outside, the faster that heat is going to leave. We know that. So if you're really hot, one thing you might do is step outside where it's cold. And the blood vessels help you get rid of that heat even faster. But what if it's cold? If it's cold, then through the same nerve signals, you send a nerve signal to your blood vessels and say, hey, it's cold. Let's constrict those blood vessels. Let's make them smaller, and which makes you look more and more pale, right? Your skin turns whiter because all that red blood is not in it as much. And that then decreases the amount of heat that gets lost. And so there's less heat there. Basically, you're saying, let's make that skin a little colder so we don't lose quite as much. The other thing that helps when it's cold is this insulating layer of fat. So that insulates us. And adds resistance, so I might put that term in there, which keeps all that heat from the inside of the body from getting out, just kind of reflects it back in and says, nope, you can't leave. So it adds some more resistance. Let's go back to another part of the skin that has to do with temperature regulation. If you're hot and turning red and radiating heat is not enough, then your body says, all right, let's try something more. Let's send a nerve signal up to my sweat glands. And that sweat gland is going to take all this water inside your body, and I know water's not red, but that sweat is pretty warm, right? So some of that warm water comes out and it evaporates, and when it evaporates, that carries a lot of heat with it. So that's another way that your skin acts kind of like a radiator, but also sort of like a swamp cooler or evaporative cooler in this case. So your skin has a lot of jobs that it does. Within your skin, then there are hair follicles. And they go down below your skin and obviously come out, and that's constantly growing. That's constantly growing because right down here at the base is very active mitosis. So we might note that mitosis going on down here at the base, and as those new skin cells or hair cells are produced, they push the old ones out and your hair grows. Last thing I'll mention is on the surface of your skin, because of all this sweat and the protein, there's lots of bacteria and some fungi that live out there, and that would be very dangerous to get inside of your body. So if you got an open wound, then it could get right in, but this layer of skin cells that's tough and tightly held together creates a pretty good barrier so that those guys really have to stay out for the most part. They can live there, and we wash them off frequently, but they don't usually get in because of that structure of the skin. Well, there's a summary of what the skin does. It's a pretty busy place. There's a lot of good biology in there, from flow down gradients to mitosis to radiating heat. Just briefly, there's a couple concepts not talked about in that concept map. One is incomplete dominance. So our skin color, along with hair color and even eye color, are incompletely dominant traits. First time we studied incomplete dominance, you had recessive and dominant alleles. And if you had a dominant allele, it covered over that recessive allele completely. You couldn't see it. But skin color is a little bit different. So if you have light skin color genes, and I have obviously a lot of those, but you have dark skin color genes, they kind of cover it up, but not completely. So if you have several dark skin color genes, but also several light skin color genes, then you end up with sort of a medium skin tone. If all you have is a bunch of dark skin color genes, then you have very dark skin. So that's how that one works. The rest of the mechanics, the Punnett squares and everything, are the same as they are for the rest of genetics that we've looked at already. Now, skin color is a little more complicated. We're not going to do a Punnett square on that because there's at least 3 separate genes that control skin color. Same with hair color. So it's hard to put it in a Punnett square because the genotype would be something like A, B, B, C, C. There's just a bunch of genes. So that also creates more variation in skin color. Otherwise, we just have 3 skin tones, dark, medium, and light. But we have more than that because we have more than one gene. Another topic in here is bacteria and fungi that live on our skin. Now, not all bacteria is bad. A lot of it is supposed to be there and actually helps protect us against bad bacteria. Fungi kind of the same way. But bacteria are really the big thing on the surface of our skin. I'm not going to try to go into here the characteristics of bacteria and fungi specifically. I'll let you read about those. So remember to catch up on those. But with bacteria in particular, one big issue is antibiotic resistance. I don't know if you've had this, but I have, where you take antibiotics and they don't help because a lot of our bacteria have become resistant over time. And this is due to natural selection. So you're writing an essay about this one. Um, Antibiotic resistance is just natural selection. Bacteria have natural variation just like we do. They don't have skin color variation, but they do have their own variation in how resistant they are to antibiotics. And that allows them to evolve, just like the beans that we did in lab evolved. And even though they started out with 4 different colors, that kind of morphed into mostly those black beans, right? They're the ones that hid the best. Well, same thing over time, the bacteria in our skin, if we use antibiotics, become more and more resistant as we select against all those ones that are not very resistant. So that's another big concept that pulls over some stuff from chapter 1 on natural selection and applies it to the bacteria on our skin.